Thank you for joining us for our Sunday school lesson this morning entitled Jacob Called Israel. Jacob called Israel. And this is the lesson for September 18th, 2022. Last week we saw Jacob and Esau, two twin brothers, coming together, but we saw that there was a vast difference between the two brothers. We saw that Esau was a huntsman. He was red. His hair was fiery red, and he was hairy all over. Whereas Jacob was clean shaven, and he was a man of the house. He stayed close to his mother, Rebecca. And then we saw later on in the story from last week that after coming from hunting, Esau was starving, or at least he said he was so hungry he thought he would faint or even die. At the time, Jacob had prepared a meal, a stew, and he asked Jacob to give him some of the stew. And then Jacob made a deal with him. He said, if you'll sell me your birthright, I'll give you the stew to eat that you may live. Esau agreed to this, so he sold his birthright for the stew and water. And Jacob went one step further. He had Esau vow a vow that he would give up his birthright for that meal. So that lesson looked at how sometimes instant gratification can cause us to make decisions that are not always wise ones. But we're going to see something else happen in today's lesson. We don't get it all, but if you read the background scripture, we're going to see how it gets to this point. Our lesson today is coming from Genesis 32, verses 22 through 32. And they read, And he rose up that night and took his 2 wives and his 2 women servants and his 11 sons and passed over the ford Jabbok. And he took them and went them over the brook and sent over he had. And Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. And when he saw that he prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh. And the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, Let me go, for the day breaketh. And he said, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me. And he said unto him, What is thy name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, Thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel. For as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and hast prevailed. And Jacob asked him and said, Tell me, I pray thee, thy name. And he said, Wherefore is it that thou dost ask after my name? And he blessed him there. And Jacob called the name of that place Peninnah, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. And as he passed over Penuel, the sun rose upon him, and he halted upon his thigh. Therefore the children of Israel eat not of the sinew which is upon the hollow of the thigh, unto this day, because he touched the hollow of Jacob's thigh, and the sinew shrank. Here we see that Jacob is about to make a move by night, but leading up to that move, Jacob had decided to return home. But was not sure if Esau had gotten word that he was coming home. So somewhat in fear, he decided he'd move through the dark of night. So when we see this lesson opening up, we see that he's gathered his family together and his 2 wives, which was, it does not mention it, but it was Leah and Rachel. He had gathered them together and all of the 11 children, and he did have a daughter that was named Dinah, but he sent them to across the brook in a different way, and he held back so that just in case he and Esau came face to face and there was a skirmish, his wife and his children would not be killed. So we see that as he stayed behind, though, as he went to sleep, he ended up wrestling with an angel of the Lord. He wrestled with this angel all night long, and the angel tried to get away from him, but the angel did not prevail because Jacob held fast to him. Finally, it was almost the break of day, and the angel told Jacob, You need to let me go because it's almost daylight. And then this is where we get the song Climbing Jacob's Ladder, because he wrestled with that angel. And Jacob, there again, being a deal maker, he made a deal with the angel. He said, I'll let you go if you bless me. If you give me a blessing, I will let go. So the angel asked him what his name was, and Jacob said, my name is Jacob. And the angel said, your name will no more be called Jacob, but Israel. It is here in this point that we see Jacob being set aside to become a different person, because remember, his name meant trickster. And we can look back over some of the things that had happened in his life. And he did not always deal straightforward or honest he was not always straightforward and honest in his dealings. So he told him that his name would be changed to Israel. And he told him with that name change that he would get a blessing from the Lord, that God would see him as a prince among men, and that he would be honored among men, and that he would have power among men. So we see that when God changes our name, he's given us a part of him. And this is what happened with Jacob. Then we see that as he continued as the angel continued this blessing and explained it to him, Jacob was true to his word, and he turned the angel loose. But where he touched the hollow of his thigh to get away from him, Jacob had a limp for the rest of his life. And isn't it interesting that when God changes us, that sometimes there's going to be a sign that there's something left behind to let us know that we've been touched by the Lord. And Jacob was left with a limp because the skin that held his thigh together was shrink. And so his one leg was somewhat shorter than the other. And this lesson even tells us in verses 31 and 32 that because of this limp for the rest of his life, the people of Israel would no longer eat of any meat that came from that area, because anything like a chicken thigh or anything that came from the thigh of a beast, they saw it as a reminder that Jacob had wrestled with this angel and that God had touched the thigh and shrank the tissue or the muscles that was in that area, and that he would limp forever because of this. This lesson lets us know that no matter what we've been through, no matter what our life was previously, that when God touches us, he gives us a new name and he gives us a new life. And more importantly, there is always a sign that you've been changed. Thank you for joining us for today's lesson where Jacob's name was changed from Jacob to Israel. And we're going to hear a lot more about the 12 tribes of Israel, because herein sets the history that we often speak of. See you next week as we look at our Sunday school lesson.